So I'll let you know.
Yeah, just tell me when we're ready to go.
Okay, I believe we're ready to go.
All right. Thank you for everyone who's joining us. Some of you may have heard this presentation before, and if you have, I appreciate you being here again. And if you have not, welcome. The big title of my presentation was Advising Dual Enrollment Students, a Collaborative Effort for Student Success, shortened to Advising Dual Enrollment Students, or dually enrolled students. So just a little background on me. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Melissa Recknor, and I'm the Director of Advising here at Surry Community College. We oversee the Career and College Promise Registration advising process, as well as our early college liaisons are part of our advising team as well. My undergraduate degree, my bachelor's, is from the University of Kentucky in music education. I have a master's degree and my EDS from Appalachian State, along with 2 graduate certificates. And I'm pursuing my doctorate degree in student affairs administration from the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse. So that's me, and feel free to put questions in the chat anytime. I'm happy to answer them as we go along. And I've told our session hosts that they can just interrupt me should you have questions as we proceed. So a little bit about Surry Community College. We are in Dobson, North Carolina, which is very rural. Those of you who have not been here, we're about 30 miles south of the Virginia border, right outside of Mount Airy or Mayberry, whatever you'd like to call it. And we serve, these are just a very brief overview of the schools we serve. Surry County Schools has 3 traditional high schools and 1 early college. They also started an online magnet academy during COVID. Yadkin County Schools, 2 traditional high schools, 1 early college, and then Elgin City and Mount Airy both have just 1 traditional high school. And Millennium Charter is our private school here in town. And of course, we serve all of our homeschool students, and our population is about 42%, last time I ran the numbers, dual enrollment students. So we have a very large population that we need to serve. In terms of our community, we are predominantly a white institution, and our Hispanic population for early college and CCP, I think the last time I looked, was about 23%. That gives you an idea of the students that we are serving as we go through this presentation. And I did a lot of research, so there is a lot of research based in here, and we'll talk about that in a moment. And I said I wasn't going to do any engagement, and because Zoom can always be kind of tricky. So you all are here at the dual enrollment session because you know why dual enrollment works. For the most part, you understand dual enrollment works for various reasons. Students are attracted to it because of free college. It increases motivation. We'll talk about all of this. It can form a bridge to college. These are just those keywords that you hear about dual enrollment throughout the time. And we're going to focus today on the collaboration, the additional supports, and why that makes dual enrollment students or helps dual enrollment students be successful, and what we do at Surry that we have found to improve success and access for our students to dual enrollment programs. So when I talk about additional supports, just for terminology, what I'm referring to are our high school personnel. We have a close relationship with them, and I'll talk about that as we go when we talk about the research. Their college advisor. So we provide a success advisor for my advising team. There are 7 of us, including myself, and each advisor is assigned to different schools. So we provide that for the school system. We also have UNC College Corps advisors out at our traditional high schools as well. Their family and friends, of course, I starred that because that looks different for every student. You know, the family may not be blood, and that's okay. That may be their friends as well. So I always put an asterisk on that to make sure everyone understands that it doesn't look the same for everybody. And then they have access to both their high school and college resources. So when I'm talking to dual enrollment students or prospective students and their families, or whoever it is that's sitting in front of me, I emphasize the fact that they now have access to maybe their high school tutors or their high school supports, as well as their high school counselor, but now they're going to have access to our college counselor, our college library, their college advisor, and all of these folks are coming together to support them. So that's just a little bit of terminology for you as we go. So I will pause for just a second, make sure we have no questions. Okay. So when we talk about dual enrollment students, as you guys know, they fall in this in between category. They're moving from the pedagogical approach of maybe their high school or middle school teaching to the adult learning process, or andragogy, Malcolm Knowles' theory of adult learning. And how are we bridging that gap? They're going back to their high school and they're still getting this pedagogy where the teacher is teaching at them for the most part. Every classroom is different, but where the teacher is teaching at them, they're telling them what to learn. And then they come into their college classroom and it's very, hopefully, more the teacher is the facilitator and they're being asked what to learn. And one of my favorite quotes from one of my early college students a couple years back, she said to me, "Miss Recknor, the high school tells you what to learn and the college is asking me what to learn." And I said, "Which did you prefer? Or what do you prefer about these things?" Because I'm always really curious about how my students learn. And she said, "I love the college classes because I can apply what I'm interested in to what I'm learning, and I can put it in my own experiences." And when we talk about the adult learning process and motivation, we also have to, with dual enrollment students, think about the motivation and how they're coming from high school and the learning process. So as we go through this session, and the research is talking about how advising can help students bridge that gap and understand the learning differences and how to be successful in both places. So these are the four main points, as I've done a lot of research in terms of advising high school students to be successful in college courses. So the first is to have a consistent assigned advisor. And the way we make that work at Surry is that we have assigned, like I said before, an advisor to all of our schools. They have one person that they can contact, and that person, the students start to learn, okay, this is my Surry advisor. I go to them for everything Surry. And by doing that, they're building their confidence, they're building that relationship, and that advisor is starting to get to know the high school processes. So for example, for Surry County Schools, Mr. Gilly, Coach Gilly, he's our volleyball coach as well. He's also an advisor, kind of does a lot of things. They know him, but he also knew what they needed in terms of orientation and what they've had in terms of preparation to then come into college classes. So he was able to build an orientation just for his Surry County School students because he knew exactly what they needed. He knew that their counselors had, made sure that they got in the right classes and they had done career exploration together and all this, but he also knew that they didn't necessarily get their Surry email address yet, and they had to be logged in, and if they were taking English 111, what different success skills they might need, and he could break those out into different sessions. But also having that consistent advisor, we can start talking to dual enrollment, prospective dual enrollment, or even prospective Surry students right from the start of their 9th grade year. So our advisors are going into classrooms and they're talking to everyone. They're not talking to just those students with a 2.8 because we know there are options for CTE programs for students below the 2.8. So we want to talk to everybody. And that was kind of a little sub bullet to this one as I was doing my research, is that equitable advising piece. And one of the things they stressed was just because they don't have good test scores, or they're not good at, I shouldn't say good, or they're not up to the same performance level in math, doesn't mean that they're not going to be a fantastic welder, or they shouldn't have access to pharmacy tech. So we reach out and we start in the 9th grade. And in 9th grade, we're doing classroom visits, we're going to parent nights. Because we do have a high percentage of Hispanic families in our community, any materials we send out or we bring are translated by our ESL coordinator. And if the school feels necessary, they'll provide us a translator, which has been really helpful because that gets the parents on board. We talk about those additional supports in the families. We found, and I have found just through observation and qualitative research here in our own community, is I have found that the parents didn't know, or the families didn't know what dual enrollment was and what it could do for their students. So by this consistent advisor, he knows or she knows exactly what that school needs and what that population looks like. So it's not just the advising piece, it's the recruiting piece, it's the community piece and tying in with the family. And just that little step in providing the translated information brought more students to our advisors in their 9th grade year to ask questions about how their students can take advantage of this when they become juniors, or if they're academically gifted, certainly sooner than that. But how can their students be prepared to do this? Why is this important? And we stress a lot of times, especially in our community, they could earn a college credential, a workforce certificate, especially here in rural North Carolina, to go out and work and support their family. And that was really attractive to a lot of families, a lot of students too, because they feel loyalty. And so that consistent advisor, again, understands the community, understands the school and the families that they're serving. And they work really closely with the high school counselor. They work really closely with the vice principal and the principal just to form a team. And we'll talk about that on the next slide, how we formed that team, because that's really important with all of these aspects, is that we have formed with this consistent advisor a team at our local schools. So that was identified based on the individual school district. So right next door, I'm pointing next door like you guys can see out my window, but right next door is Surry Central High School. They are a larger school with more students. And so they have a larger team that they've identified. Whereas in Yadkin County, maybe at Forbush High School, they have a smaller team, and it's just the counselor and the college advisor, and then our advisor as well. So it's smaller, and it's based on those individual schools. Again, we'll talk about that in a minute, but the consistent advising ties in here because they can form that relationship not only with the students, but with their teams at their high school. So talking about, we hit them, we meet with them starting their freshman year in group sessions in their classrooms. And then starting their sophomore year, we aim for more individualized conversations. Now, everyone knows we don't have a lot of time, but being that we have the consistent advisor at these schools, and they're only at their schools one day a week because we have a small advising team. Granted, there are 7 of us, but we do all advising for all the CCP students as well as the traditional students, especially for onboarding. Our faculty take over traditional as they go on, but because we are relationship proactive advising, we hold that model, we see our students a lot of times. So when we get into that sophomore year, got a little off track there, we start meeting with them individually, especially if they're AIG and they may qualify. And we identify these students, these AIG students, as we go along. So we're talking to them, in a different setting because they qualify earlier. But that sophomore year, we can start talking to students with the counselor and maybe the UNC College Corps rep. What are your plans? Seeing what they've done in their career assessments and figuring out like a path and making a recommendation, hearing their goals. And again, we're building that relationship with that consistent advisor from day one. And it has really helped because students, yes, you're still going to have, and we still do have the students that they're not really interested in college. They are just trying to make it through high school. And sometimes the counselors will even have to say, you can talk to the student, but know that there might not be room in their high school schedule because we have to get them through English 4. And so that has been a challenge. And I don't want to make it seem like unicorns and roses over here because we do have challenges, but with this consistent advisor, we have built the respect of our local schools and the confidence that they have with this advisor, and they can be honest. And they know that when the advisor is talking to the student, they're not, trying to get them out of high school classes. That's been a big concern. They're not trying to keep them out of the high school. They are working with all these partners to get a holistic view of this student and help the student get to the goals that they want to have. In the 11th grade and 12th grade, they are individual meetings. And most schools will let us pull them right out of class to do planning. And we'll talk about that, what that looks like in just a moment. But again, that consistent advising piece kind of covers a lot of things. And in the research, they said that was really important, again, to form that relationship and build trust with the students. And we know that that's huge. Proactive, intrusive advising, relationship building is one of the top tenets of that, so that you can help the student bridge the gap to college, knowing exactly what their individual needs are. And I was talking about the individual meetings starting in their sophomore year. And the reason we started so soon is so, again, when they are going to bridge to college, whether that be for dual enrollment or for traditional enrollment later on, we know what skills they need to have or what skills they don't have, what skills they do have, where their strengths are, where their weaknesses are. Do they need financial support? Do they need transportation? And I know that I can go to I'm going to use Caleb again as an example, Mr. Gilly, and say, tell me about your students. What do you need? And he can tell me right off the bat, because he keeps that running list of what they need to support their students. And because we do have centers, we have a Yadkin Center, Elkin Center, Mount Airy, Elkin, we can kind of serve all of our students. And the advisors will also know what we need to offer at those centers. So they work closely with the deans. And here's where we come into the feedback loop piece, is the advisors can bring information back to the college and the college to the high schools of what has to happen to keep these students successful. So my favorite example is Caleb was working with his team at East Surry High School, and they expressed a need for a calculus class. And of course, there's always that question of, are these students really going to be successful in college calculus? And he was able to come back to us and say, I need it at this time. I'm going to have this many students. I've already talked to the pre-calculus honors teacher. Here's why they, are ready to do this, etc. And we were able to get that class out there, and we have filled it with 20 kids for the last 2 years. So that's just an example where that feedback loop and the consistent advising piece have played a huge role. And in the research, the feedback loop talks a lot about bringing information to everybody, so everybody is well informed. And that just doesn't mean the teams at the high school. We do a lot of staff meetings. And by we, I mean the advisors out at the schools with the teachers that are seeing these students, because a lot of times, even though we're seeing students since the 9th grade, they don't necessarily connect with us or anyone on my team. They might connect with their English teacher or their health science teacher. And that way the health science teacher can say, hey, you've really got a good knack for this. Have you considered nurse aid? Or have you considered, office administration, or whatever it might be? That way they know all the options as well. And it helps high school graduation rates, as we all know, with dual enrollment, to get students in these courses, especially maybe those strugglers. And we've worked really closely with our high schools with this feedback loop to identify the students that may be struggling in high school, why they're struggling in high school, and is there something at the college that they can pick up, welding, collision repair, mechatronics, etc., whatever it is, that might increase their motivation to complete their high school diploma, maybe bring up their grades, bring up their GPA. So again, that feedback loop and the consistent assigned advisor all tie in together, and we form that team. And I'll talk about how we form the team on the next slide. But the next part of the research is to relay college expectations. Now, there are things we can't control. A lot of the research, of course, talks about keeping the rigor, the academic rigor of college classes. And as advisors, if we're not teaching those classes, obviously we're not going to go to a teacher and say, hey, make sure you're teaching the dual enrollment students the same as you're teaching traditional. But we can relay to the students what they are going to need to do once they get into these classes. And again, with that feedback loop and educating the teachers as well as our team, we can make sure these students are well prepared for college classes. And some obviously are going to be more prepared than others, and knowing them, again, we go back to that consistent advisor piece, knowing them individually, our advisors are going to know where they struggle, and they can help them build those success skills as success advisors before they even get into the classrooms. The nice thing too with these college expectations is once the college classes start, our advisors are going to start pulling these kids from their high school classes, if they've got any, once a week or whenever the high school says we can, to talk to them and just kind of review their grades. Where are they struggling? Where are they doing well? If they're doing well, they'll probably leave them alone for quite a long time. But if they need a little extra support, it might be that every day that they are on campus or on the high school campus, they're meeting with this student with their teams, depending on what that team looks like, or they're meeting with the student alone, or they're meeting them at the academic support center here on campus. But again, that goes back to the consistent assigned advisor and the individualized relationship. The other thing with the college expectations is we do use Aviso Engage. So we pull weekly reports, and I get a lot of questions on this. We pull weekly reports for our high school partners that show the student, the class they're in, and what their current grade is. And we also pull an attendance report for them as well. And that way, when we're not there, because we're only one person that's there one day a week, whereas the rest of the team is there, all 5 days, And the rest of the team can call home where we can't. So by having that relationship with our schools, we know if we send them this report and there's a student that's struggling and we've already talked about it, they can call home and have that meeting with or without us. Sometimes they will have our advisors on Teams or Zoom in with the student, or Google Meet, I guess we use around here as well, in with the student and the parent. Our early college does this quite a bit. They'll have a parent meeting, they'll call the liaison in. Knowing that the liaison, of course, can't talk to the parent without the student's permission, but they can provide information and success skills and topics that they can work on just from knowing the student, knowing their grades, and being able to talk to the instructors as well. So when we talk about college expectations, it's not just being prepared for that English class. It's not just going to class. It's how can we help you and how can we help them be successful continuously and throughout the semester and start on that good foot and then keep it up as they're bridging maybe to a four-year school or they're coming here to finish an applied degree or whatever that might be. And so the other thing with college expectations that we stress with our students is how to speak up for yourself and stand up for yourself, not necessarily argue, but have a voice, participate in class, go to your instructor's office hours. Like that's one thing we talk about a lot is this is different than high school. Your teachers aren't going to pull you. Your teachers aren't going to sit down with you over smart lunch. You have to go to them and we will walk them to their instructor's office hours. We'll sit down with them if they need us to, because we've again built that relationship with them. And I know this sounds like a lot of time, and it is. And our advising caseloads are not small, but because our faculty do take care of most of the traditional advising, we're here for mentoring and alerts and grades and success habits. We can focus on doing this with our students. And we do it with our traditional students as well. But this is what the research has said has been really successful for dual enrollment students and what we are trying to integrate. And again, with our teams that I'll talk about in just a second, we set up those individualized orientations, what they need to know. Some of the schools will bring their students to campus and give them a tour, and we can go with them and show them the different classrooms and make sure they understand, on the first day of class, make sure you have XYZ. It's just things that the little things that you might not think of as someone who's been to college or is working at a college. We try and cover by identifying the family need, the individual need, and then the school need all kind of put together. And the planning piece, I will also talk about a little bit more in depth here as we go to the next few slides. But for planning, we look at an overarching view with the student, as I was talking about earlier, with the consistent advising piece. So if you're doing, let's say, the college transfer pathway starting in your senior year, what does that mean for you? What is it going to look like in terms of college classes? And we lay it out semester by semester so they understand, students and families understand, and they can see that end goal and what that looks like for them. And it's not just, oh, I'm taking music because, my best friend is taking music appreciation. Or it's not, I'm taking history because, I need it for the crosswalk. I need it for high school credit, which they do, but they also understand. And our goal is for that students and parents and counselors, whoever, to understand why the student is taking that class and what it means when they graduate from high school. What can they do with that when they leave? And again, it's a plan, not just for while they're in high school. It's all planned out, even when they graduate. If they're going to come back to us, we'll lay out what classes they'll need to take. And will it take a year? Will it take a year and a half, 2 years? How many classes do you want to take at a time? How many classes should you take at a time? Let's not get overzealous here. And we have realistic conversations with that full team before they go off to college, where it really is up to them. So that planning piece is also really beneficial because students can, we have a internship program here in Surry County called Surry Works, and it's a paid internship program. So if there's room in their schedule and maybe they're doing our welding program or our office administration program, we can set them up with a paid internship. And so we have to be able to look at the high school schedule. Is there going to be room? And the college schedule, what do you need to take to get to this point? Are you interested in this? Let's get you on the right track. So again, it's really comprehensive. It's really holistic, but this is what, the research is saying. These are the things that really have shown be or to help students, dual enrollment students, be successful. And that planning piece is really big because they see the end goal. So many students we see walk through our door and they say, well, I took psychology in high school, but I really don't know why. Well, sometimes it's because it fit in your schedule, right? But a lot of times for us, we don't want students to have that question. We want them to know why they're taking the class, how it's going to benefit them. And then when they forget 5 minutes after they leave our door, we have the document saved in Aviso under documents so anyone can access it and answer that question should they have it. The trick here and the challenge here is that our local partners obviously don't have access to college software. So we work it out in each school, how that looks. Do they print it and put it in the student's file? Do they keep it in a shared folder? Does the LEA reach out to the advisor when they need a copy? There are all sorts of ways that they do it, but again, it's all based on the school and individualized that way. So I'm going to pause really quickly before I move on to the next slide for any questions. And I know I talk fast, and I apologize. I'm from New York, so that's where it comes from. So feel free to put in the chat if you need me to slow down too. Okay. So I promised we would talk about forming the team because I feel like this is something that we did really well with that consistent advising piece and creating our feedback loop. We identified a need for a stronger partnership with our local schools, a more intensive and intrusive advising process with our dual enrollment dual enrollment students. Thank you, Mary. I was reading that there's no questions and talking the words. So we sat down and thought about with each school, what does this look like for you? How can we serve you? What do you need? Because to be honest with you, we revamped our advising team. When I came on, there was a couple retirements and we just hired a bunch of new employees. So for us, it was a great way to kind of start this new process. And it was right around the time when in North Carolina, we were talking about CCP eligibility and making sure, really emphasizing that students are being placed in classes that are appropriate to what they want to do. They're not just taking psychology to fill an elective. They're not just taking art to fill a high school requirement, or they're not just taking the history classes for the crosswalk. They are going to transfer, etc. So a lot of the schools, in line with the research said, we want someone that we can call on and one person, not like, well, Tish was here yesterday, but I guess Caitlin's coming next week and maybe Eli's coming the week after. No, they wanted that consistent piece. Now, the other thing that they said was we would like them out here more than one day a week. Well, we don't have the staffing to be able to do that because they're serving 2 or 3 schools each. But we did tell them with this person, you can work out maybe a couple times where they are there 2 or 3 days a week during the busy registration process. Or, by having that consistent advisor, they can do that and they can work it out on their own. And that has been really helpful. So when we talk about the team, that's a good question. Okay, let me pause there. The question is, what is your ratio of high school counselors to students? High. Our high school counselors, I don't remember the last time I looked at the ratio here, but it was like 338 to 1 in Surry County, and maybe it was like 400 to 1 in Yankton County. I'd have to pull out the sheet. I just looked at it, but our counselors, I'm really glad you said that because we try and take the stress off of the counselors of trying to advise for Surry classes because they were having to do that in a lot of our schools. They were trying to have to advise for dual enrollment and they don't know all of the programs. They have enough on their plate already. So we came in and said, we can help you with that. And in most of our schools, the counselor is on the team. At one of our schools, the counselors are minimally involved. They have such high caseloads that they can't really get themselves involved with dual enrollment, and they put a lot of trust in us to place the students in the right classes. And they'll take a look at the applications when it comes in just to make sure. But because we're starting to get to know them in their 9th grade year, we're able to have that conversation and the counselors trust us to put them in classes appropriately. And then in terms of advisors to students, it really depends, and it's a little bit different based on each high school. So Caleb, who serves all 3 Surry County schools, he's got about 500 dual enrollment students because he's serving 3 very large high schools. So I keep his traditional load, or I try and keep his traditional load down to about 100 traditional students, if not less. Each of our advisors carries a load of about 600 students, which is a lot. And then, like I said, they average a caseload of 500 to 650 students. What that ratio is of high school versus traditional will vary depending on how many schools they serve. I hope that answered the question okay. If not, feel free to put more questions in the chat. So when we formed our team, we look at each of the schools, how are we supporting these students? What do they need in this particular area? What do the families need? And from there we built. So when we rebuilt our advising team, we sat down with one of the assistant superintendents at Surry County Schools, and we kind of hashed out what the needs were. And by doing that, they were able to identify at each school who was going to be on this CCP team, who could Caleb go to when he had questions about students, when he needed schedules, when he needed to pull a student from class, etc. So at our bigger schools, like I was saying before, it is usually one of the high school, if not both of the high school counselors, us as the college advisor, our UNC College Corps rep, any family and friends. We always consider them part of the team, even though we might not be communicating with them in that feedback loop. And then the principal can be on there. In some schools he is, in some schools they've designated the assistant principal, in some schools they aren't even on there at all, or aren't involved in the registration advising process for dual enrollment. So it looks very different, but that's how we started and how we formed the team. And it started with one conversation with one person and brainstorming what we needed and then building it out for the schools. Is that going to look different in your areas? Probably so, but it really helped us to be able to start with what do they need and what do their students need. And I was talking about Surry County Schools, so I'll continue with that. One of the biggest things, again, they said is they need a consistent advisor, but they need someone who's going to be really proactive, someone they can call on, you know, all the time and all this. And Caleb, so much so, they have given him Power School access. So those of you who understand the high school end, know that getting Power School access can be kind of tricky. And that was a big deal for us. And we were really excited about that because that also took off the high school counselors having to print transcripts, having to pull up a student's record when they come in, having to figure out what class the student is in. And that might seem trivial, but the counselors are so, as you guys know, so overloaded and so overwhelmed some days that it's just easier for him or whoever to pull up the schedule and say, I need to see Susie, and it looks like she's in English 4, and just go get her, rather than, hey, counselor, where is Susie? Okay, can I get her from English 4? Okay, can you call her out of class? Okay, can, you know, all this stuff. So we formed such a relationship with our schools that we can do that. And the UNC College Corps folks, they rotate. Those of you that don't have them or aren't familiar with the program, every 2 years, we get a new UNC rep at each school or whatever rotation they're on. So that can be a little bit challenging, but the nice thing about that is we aren't alone. They're out there, you know, 2 or 3 days a week. And so they can see students as well when we're not there, or they can Google Meet us in or Zoom us in if we're off campus. And they do a lot of career exploration, a lot of college exploration with students. So they also have background, and we don't have to pull the students twice or talk to them twice to get the same information or the same answer. So that is how we formed our team and who is on some of our teams. At one of our smaller schools, Elkin City Schools, it is our advisor, the UNC College Corps person, and the counselor. Every once in a while, they'll pull in the CTE coordinator, but for the most part, it's those folks responsible for student success at that school. So it will look different, and it does look different at all of our schools, regardless of size, so, or in conjunction with size. I think my words are slowly starting to go. And the last thing I wanted to kind of mention before I open it up for more questions, because I do really enjoy the discussion piece of this. You know, everyone comes with different ideas and what you guys are doing at your schools that can tie in with this research. So I always like to close with what we're doing with the research, and then of course hear from you all. So when we're talking about the planning process, and I touched on this a little bit, we're looking at how they have done academically in their high school classes, what their career assessments may say, what we've talked to them about, where their strengths and weaknesses lie, and how that lines up with these career goals or their educational goals. And then what are their outside factors? Are they tied to Surry County for whatever reason? A lot of times their families are here and they can't leave, you know, they support their families. So what options can we find for them? Do they have transportation? Can they come to main campus? Do we have to get them at one of the centers? If they are going to be at one of the centers, can they get a bus there, or do we need to try and get them some gas money? So when we look at a lot of things, oh, and also the outside factors, Surry County schools and Elkin City and Mount Airy all pay for textbooks. So if they're in Yadkin County, we look at, can they afford the textbook for this class? Because as you guys know, some of the codes for these online courses like Cengage and stuff are really expensive. Can they afford that? Are they doing nurse aid? Can they afford the final certification exam at the end? If not, how can we get them this funding? And our foundation is really great, and they work with us, they work with our students, they try and get them the funding as best we can. But if they can't help, is there an outside resource that could help? Is there a scholarship at the high school? Is there a scholarship here? Is there, you know, how can we help them pay for these fees and textbooks, because their tuition is covered, to allow them to take advantage of this process? So once we get all of this kind of together and an overarching view of the student, where do we start? What does that career assessment say compared to your educational aspirations? And what does that pathway look like for dual enrollment? And once you complete that pathway, what does it look like if you want to come back to college or go off to college? And we do have realistic conversations. If they're at that 2.0 GPA with the UNC advisor and the counselor, you want to transfer to Duke? Okay, well, we really need to have a bigger conversation here, because that 2.0 is probably not going to get you into Duke, but we don't want to break their spirits. We know the families. Let's talk about how college classes, what you have to do to be successful in high school. And again, just because they don't want to come to Surry doesn't mean we're not going to help them. We're going to sit with that college advisor and we're going to have that conversation. And maybe there is something that Surry can do to help them. We have a job skills training class through our continuing education department that's grant funded. So when they graduate from high school, if they don't have plans, they're kind of in the undecided realm that falls through the cracks. Again, we know them. We've built a relationship with them, since the 9th grade. And hopefully we can approach them and say, hey, this is a great option for you. It's free. It's only a week long. You get OSHA certified. They do all sorts of training in there. Let's do this so that when you are able, or you can go get a job and you want to go get a job, hopefully you want to go get a job, you'll have this, this ability. So it's not just about dual enrollment. It's also about success when they graduate with this planning process. And if I were to pull up a Word document, and I know there's kind of a lag here, so I'm not going to do that, but you would see that we have it laid out semester by semester and what they're taking. And the early college ones are easier to do because they're here on our main campus. They start in 9th grade, and that process there's a lot less classes that they would have to take when they graduate. And most of our early college students do complete their 2-year degree by the end of their 5th year. But again, that planning process with them, if they want to transfer, or any of our dual enrollment students, is what's on that baccalaureate degree plan? What do you need when you go off? It's great that you want to take psychology, but if you want to major in history, your social sciences really should be XYZ, like American government and American history. Okay, you want to major in engineering? Well, let's have a realistic conversation that involves 3 calculus classes and some physics. And we look at, okay, their high school math grades are not strong. Well, okay, maybe we should start with this while you're in CCP. Here's how it would look for you. Here's how it would look if you came to Surry after you graduated. If you didn't come to Surry after you graduated, talk about the differences between a 4-year school classroom versus a Surry Community College classroom for calculus. And just those little things to help them start thinking about college and that college going culture. So when we talk about the research, and I'm going to open it up for questions because we are getting to about the 40-minute mark and I want there to be time for discussion. When we start talking about the research and how we've implemented it, the biggest thing is that consistent assigned advisor, creating the feedback loop and the team at your schools, helping your students with college expectations and kind of bridging that gap or bridging that transition from pedagogy to andragogy in their college classrooms, and planning. Of course, academic rigor is also mentioned quite a bit in the research, but for advising, unless you're teaching the class, I kind of steered away from that because I never want to tell an instructor how to run their classroom. I share my research, of course, with our deans and things like that. But there's also some talk about in the research integrating dual enrollment students with traditional students. So for us, we do not teach college classes at the high schools because we want our dual enrollment students integrated with traditional age students. And there's research, if you haven't, and I can put it in the chat, I guess, too, if you need the link, but if you have not read the dual enrollment playbook, I highly suggest you do that. It just came out last year, I think. It's a really great read. It talks a lot about equitable advising for high school students, equitable access and things like that. So we've tried to do quite a bit of what they talked about, and specifically reaching all students, not just those with a 2.8 GPA, and looking at their stuff, grades and aspirations holistically. So that is the information, the research. What are your questions? I guess now is the time to open it up for questions. And of course, if you have none and you just want to write down my contact information and email me later, that's absolutely fine too.
We're still waiting for questions to come in, but I would just want to say as well, highly recommend dual enrollment playbook as well. Great resource.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you for thank you for that. Yeah, when that came out, I was thrilled. I've read it cover to cover several times just to make sure, because we've got such a huge population of dual enrollment students that make sure we are serving them as best we can. And we're always looking at data to make sure that we're doing that, or qualitative data too, just kind of listening in the high school hallways about what people are saying and in the community and stuff, so that we're constantly evolving our practices, assessing what we're doing, evaluating, whether it be just short qualitative surveys to the high schools or sitting down with the parents and stuff like that too. So yeah, dual enrollment playbook.
Indeed. All right, we do have one question that's come in. How are you engaging prospective CCP students and families?
A great question. Thank you for asking that. So several ways. Of course, first I talked about that we're going to the classrooms and kind of talking about these opportunities. If we have the chance, of course, this past year was difficult with COVID. We will bring current students that are enrolled in CCP to these classrooms so that they can hear from their peers how it's helping them, what they're doing with their credentials when they leave. And that way students aren't just here, and we're not just bringing college transfer either. We bring in the students that are in welding, and a lot of our welding students get jobs right out of college, right before they even get their certificate. So they can talk a lot about that and how they've got a job lined up. We go to high school parent nights, all of them, regardless of the grade, so that parents and students can start to hear about this opportunity well before it might even be an option for them. So, you know, a lot of times, and I'm sure you all are aware of this, you go to the parent nights and it sometimes goes in one ear and out the other, but they've taken the materials home, they hear it every year, so that by the time they're juniors, the parents can start to remember, maybe, or the families, I shouldn't just say parents, the families, you know, can encourage their students to do this if it's even a viable option. Some students might just be, you know, trying to get by in high school, and we're okay. You know, we're not going to force dual enrollment on anyone, but we are there to support them, regardless of the decision that they make. So those parent nights have been really helpful because, again, there's a translator there. A lot of times they'll break sessions out for parents that might not speak English, so that they are with that translator, maybe in a quieter setting, and we can spend more time, because obviously you have to go back and forth with the translator. And that has been huge in our community, just acknowledging and supporting our non-English speakers, because then too, that bridges the gap for those parents or families to maybe come into our ESL program if that's something they want to do. So they have that point of contact as well. We've just started this year to go to high school football games so that we can talk to parents or families there that may not come to parent nights. We do all sorts of things, but those are probably our biggest. As we start in the classrooms in their 9th grade year, we set up in the hallways, we set up in the cafeterias. My advisors will talk to students just around campus or as they're at the high schools just to say, hey, and not make it a conversation about college, just make it a conversation of, hey, this is who I am, who are you? Like, we want to get to know you. And then we'll bring in the what can we do for you piece. Hopefully that answers that question.
Approximately how many dual enrollment students participate in CCP at Surry Community? And also kind of consistent with that is on having consistent advisors to help students. Was that always in place, or was it that way, or is it a new change at Surry?
Sure, good question. So we enroll about 42% of our population dual enrollment. So our enrollment right now is about 3,100 or so. So about 1,000, a little bit more than 1,000, 1,250 dual enrollment, including our early colleges. So that includes our early college enrollment too. Our main campus early college has about 350 students. Our Yadkin Center has about 225 or so. And then each school is different just based on their population. And then with the consistent advising piece, that was not, it kind of was a thing, but it wasn't official. So we had one advisor that would kind of make his rounds to all the schools, and he was the CCP advisor, but he only went to the Surry County schools and like Mount Airy. So then another high school went to Elkin and another Yadkin high school, and then we had another advisor. So they were kind of all over the place. It was never really official. They had consistent days, but what they did at the schools wasn't necessarily what we've changed. What they did at the schools is just kind of set up in the college corners or the counselor's office, and they were just there to answer questions and register for CCP. What we've changed really once we hired a whole new team of advisors is how they're reaching the students at the schools, how they're engaging with the partners and the students and the families to make sure that these students are successful, especially when the GPA requirement went down and things changed with RISE, that 2.8. And especially because we are aiming to enroll more students in our CTE pathways for their own success. So what changed from the consistent advising piece is we took the load off of just one advisor and spread it to all the others, and what they're doing at the schools. They're not just sitting in a classroom twiddling their thumbs waiting for a student to walk in. They are out there actively talking to students and getting to know folks. So hopefully that answers your question about that.
And that's just about all of our questions that we have, and we're right at time. One other question that came in, which I think you've really addressed it, but if there's anything else you would like to add, outreach and marketing efforts to broaden awareness around dual enrollment and student support services.
Yeah, that's a great question. I know I mentioned that we send letters home that we have translated by our ESL department, and they are in both languages. We also send postcards home that have a picture of their advisor on it, so that they, sometimes if you're like me, names but not faces. So they can see a name with the face, and when they're on campus, it kind of humanizes the approach a little bit to be able to see that person. Especially if you've seen them walk around the halls and you really didn't remember who they were. Now you can say, or a student or a parent can say, hey, go see Miss King at Forbush, like this is who she is, take this with you, or what have you. And again, those cards are translated. We have CCP dual enrollment handbooks that lay out all of the programs that we have, not pros and cons, but the benefits to the program. Those go to our high school counselors and get distributed at all parent nights to all students all the time. We have an electronic copy as well, that we can circulate. And then of course it's on our website, and it is a lot of word of mouth because we start in the classrooms their freshman year, and we say, here's this opportunity, and they start talking about it. And is it the perfect marketing scheme? I don't know. To be honest with you, we're just trying to reach students as best we can. We found that emails really weren't working, as you guys know now. They're not checking their emails. They don't want to check their emails. If they get this thing from Surry Community College, they don't really want to read it. And it's not a quick text. So now the high school counselors they've got reminds set up usually, or the UNC reps do. So they can send group reminds to their students or their parents. One of our schools has a remind set up just for parents and a remind set up just for students. So they might be getting the same information, but maybe there's something that the parents need to encourage their students to do. And we can use those remind apps as well. And that was part of the partnership pieces, that they are allowing us to do this and helping us, because it helps them too. But that's another part of the marketing that we do with them. And I try and plaster, sorry, one more thing. I try and plaster the advisor's face everywhere I can, because I want them to be able to see them and know who they are. So if there's a poster we hang up or whatever, if they need to see that particular advisor, there's a picture of them. So they know who they're seeing, they know who it is. It's not just a name that they're just walking into a room with this random person.
All right, we're right at time. So thank you, Melissa, so much for a great presentation on broadening our advising and scope of marketing and intentional advising, for
Yes.
our students.
Thank you so much for having me.